Part 11, Marilyn Monroe. As many of us know, Marilyn was an actress, singer, model, and fashion icon who still to this day has some influences. On August 5th of 1962, when she was just 36 years old, Marilyn was found unresponsive in her bed by her housekeeper. She was laying on her stomach with no clothes on, and found next to her were a couple bottles of meds. As far as cardiovascular system goes, nothing was too out of the ordinary. Both lungs were moderately congested with some edema. Her gallbladder had previously been removed. Multiple sections of the liver show slight signs of accentuation of the lobular pattern, but no tumor or hemorrhage was found. Both kidneys, her stomach, and her colon were congested. There were no pill fragments found in her stomach. Her COD was listed as barbiturate poisoning, and it was classified as self-inflicted. Due to the high levels of barbiturates in her system, but no fragments being found in her stomach, has led to much controversy. Famous Autopsies, Part 12, Amy Winehouse. Born September 14th of 1983, Amy would quickly grow a promising singing career, but it was all cut short at 27. Unfortunately, since the late 2000s, Amy had struggled with addiction, and on July 23rd of 2011, she succumbed to it. She had also struggled with bulimia her whole life. Her bodyguard said that her last few days were spent with her watching TV, watching some videos, listening to music, and drinking. On her last day, her bodyguard would check on her and then let her sleep in late because she normally did that, and then at around 3 o'clock, grow suspicious. He then noticed she was not breathing, didn't have a pulse, so he called police, and it was revealed that she was no longer alive. Toxicology determined that her blood alcohol level was 5 times greater than the legal driving limit at around 0.4. 2 empty bottles of vodka were found near her. There were signs of respiratory failure as well as congestion in her lungs, but it can be noted that she passed in her sleep. Famous Autopsies, Part 13, Naya Rivera. Born January 12th of 1987, Naya was an actress, singer, and model who got her start as a child actress, starring in some TV commercials, but would go on to get one of her biggest major roles in Glee, on her way to a pretty promising career. On a nice hot day on July 8th of 2020, Naya and her 4-year-old son Josie would rent a boat and go out on Lake Piru. They would rent and load on the boat as you see them walking here, and then leave at around 1. Hours would pass and they would not return, and then a search would ensue, which would result in the boat being found with only Josie on it. Josie explained they had been swimming, and then his mom kind of frantically pushed him up onto the boat, and the boat started to drift away, and the last thing he saw was his mom screaming for help with her arms above the water. Her body would be found on July 13th, already showing signs of decomposition inside and out. There was a small amount of alcohol in her blood, as well as phentermine and diazepam, which were prescribed, and her COD was listed as drowned. Famous Autopsies, Part 14, Nipsey Hussle. Born August 15th of 1985, Nipsey Hussle would go on to become a successful rapper, businessman, as well as scoring a few roles in a few movies. On March 31st of 2019, Nipsey would be hanging around with some fans as well as Eric Holder, and the two would get into a discussion which would turn heated, resulting in Eric opening fire on Nipsey outside of his store. Nipsey was shot 10 times. Sadly, just 30 minutes later, he would be gone. His most catastrophic wounds would be the damage that was taken to his head and his torso. He would suffer severe blood loss, perforated and collapsed lungs, severed spinal column, cracked ribs. As for Eric, he would drive away, go get him some fries, then brag about it on Insta. But he would soon be arrested, and his trial is set to begin in June. Famous Autopsies, Part 15. Today we're talking about Janis Joplin. Born January 19th of 1943 in Port Arthur, Texas, Janis would go on to become a very successful and very well-known rocker. But just as she was starting to flourish, her life would be cut short on October 4th of 1970, adding her as another member to the 27 Club. She would be found in her Hollywood hotel room. Present on both of her arms were numerous needle marks, both old and new. There were 2 hemorrhagic areas on her left arm. Some blood was present in her mouth. Her lungs showed signs of edema and congestion. There was fatty metamorphosis of her liver, which is common in a lot of patients with severe alcoholism. There would also be visceral congestion present. Her COD would be an overdose from heroin as well as morphine. Famous Autopsies, Part 16, Carrie Fisher. Born October 21st of 1956, Carrie Fisher would go on to follow in the footsteps of her mother, Debbie Reynolds, and become a very famous actress. On December 23rd of 2016, she would suffer an episode while on an airplane and then be taken into the hospital where days later, on December 27th, she would pass after going into cardiac arrest. Sadly, the following day, her mother would also pass. The autopsy report would find a swollen heart, signs of mild coronary artery calcification, some signs of arthritis, and degenerative changes to her pelvis and spine. Fluid would be found in her sinuses and ears. Numerous drugs were found in her system, such as cocaine, methadone, opiates, and morphine, as she had struggled with drug addiction most of her life. Famous Autopsies, Part 17, John Denver. Born December 31st of 1943 in Roswell, New Mexico, John went on to become a very popular singer-songwriter. Also during his life, he obtained a pilot's license and logged over 2,500 flight hours. On October 12th of 1997, he made the fatal decision to fly an amateur-made plane, which he had struggled with in the past as he had a hard time controlling it. And at around 5:30, while flying over the Monterey Bay, he was trying to switch gas tanks and lost control, and the plane crashed in the water. This would result in his body just being ripped apart and arriving in pieces to the lab. Most of his mouth and teeth were not found. His pelvis was fractured and dismembered, as well as his right leg being torn off, and several other organs were just shredded. He lost his life on impact. Famous Autopsies, Part 18, Prince. Prince was born on June 7th of 1958 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He soon grew up to be a singer whose music incorporated a variety of genres, which garnered him a large fan base. Unfortunately, on April 21st of 2016, his lifeless body would be found in his elevator in his house. Found on scene would be a bottle of hydrocodone, but none would be found in his system. Instead, he had high levels of fentanyl in his system, which he had no idea he was on. It would soon be revealed that the pills in his possession were fakes, and they were instead pills with fentanyl pressed into them to make them look real, and they contained lethal levels. No one around him shown any signs of them knowing that it was counterfeit pills Famous Autopsies, Part 19, Notorious B.I.G. Christopher George Wallace was born on May 21st of 1972 in New York and would go on to become what some call one of the greatest rappers of all time. On March 8th of 1997, he would attend the Soul Train Awards after party hosted by Vibe and Quest Records at the Peterson Automotive Museum. At around 12:30 that night, the fire department shut down the party due to overcrowding. So by around 12:45, Biggie and his crew were leaving and stopped at a red light about 50 yards from the museum. A black Chevy Impala would pull up next to them, fire at his car, striking him 4 times. And by 1:15, he would pass. The autopsy would find moderate pulmonary and cerebral edema. Large amounts of blood would be found in his chest and pericardium. The first 3 shots were non-fatal, with the last one being the fatal one. The first would enter his left forearm and rest near the wrist. The second would enter his back and come out of his shoulder. Third enters left thigh and leaves near his groin. The last shot would enter his left hip and strike his heart, lung, colon, and liver. Famous Autopsies, Part 20, Bill Paxton. Born on May 17th of 1955 in Fort Worth, Texas, Bill would go on to become a very prolific actor and filmmaker, starring in roles in Twister, Titanic, Edge of Tomorrow, Tombstone, Weird Science, Aliens, and a list that goes on and on. During an interview in 2017, he would reveal that he had a damaged aortic heart valve resulting from rheumatic fever, which he had when he was 14. On February 14th, he underwent open heart surgery to correct the aortic aneurysm and repair the damaged valve. His condition would deteriorate over the next 10 days before suffering a fatal stroke on February 25th. Bill's family would file a lawsuit against the surgeon, claiming he used unconventional and high-risk methods, and he was not present in the OR when complications arose, which led to the second surgery and Bill passing. Last year, they'd reach a partial settlement for $1 million, then later reach a settlement with the doctor and hospital for undisclosed terms. Famous Autopsies, Part 21, Leslie Jordan. Leslie was born on April 29th, 1955 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He'd grow up to be a staggering 4'11" and go on to find a career in singing, comedy, and acting. On October 24th, 2022, at around 9:30, Leslie would be on his way to set to film when suddenly his car would crash into the side of a building at Cahuenga Boulevard and Romaine Street in Hollywood. The autopsy would determine that the crash itself didn't result in any serious injury. There would be no traces of drugs or alcohol in his system, and at the time of his passing, he had been sober for over 2 decades. It was soon revealed that he had suffered from a very quick and very sudden fatal cardiac dysfunction. This would be due to arteriosclerosis. Arteriosclerosis is pretty much the buildup of fats, cholesterols, and other substances on and in your artery walls. This buildup causes narrowing of the arteries and obstructs the blood flow. Famous Autopsies Part 22, Anton Yelchin. Anton was born on March 11th of 1989 in Russia. When he was 6 months old, him, along with his parents, would move to the US. By 27, he had built up a nice resume as an actor, starring in films such as Star Trek, Terminator Salvation, Green Room, and Fright Night. Sadly, at around 1 a.m. on June 16th of 2016, his lifeless body would be found by his friends, pinned between his gate and his Jeep Cherokee. His Jeep Cherokee model was among a million others, which had been recalled due to the gear shifters confusing drivers, thinking their car was in park, and it soon rolling away. And that's what investigators theorized happened here, as he put it in neutral and it rolled down the incline, pinning him. He would suffer crushing injuries to his rib cage and hypoxia in his lungs. There were also head injuries present, presumably from him being slammed into the gate. His COD would be blunt trauma asphyxiation, and it's said that he would pass in only 1 minute of the accident.